Hi everybody, I'm Brian Gallagher, the Curator of Decorative Arts at the Mint Museum, and I am standing here at the very beginning of a wonderful exhibition that just opened here at the Mint called Classic Black, the Basalt Sculpture of Wedgwood and His Contemporaries. So before we get started, let me just go over a few quick details so you understand what we're looking at. Basalt refers to a type of stoneware body that Josiah Wedgwood, a really important Staffordshire potter who lived in the late 18th century, perfected, and everything that we look at in this exhibition is focusing on this black basalt stoneware, highlighting it. He made his black basalt by mixing together a couple of key ingredients. One was a metallic oxide called manganese. He blended that with something called carr, C-A-R-R, which is this sludgy type of material that's made when iron oxide drips down through the coal mine deposits that were throughout Staffordshire, and that iron oxide stains the clay that's underneath those coal deposits. So again, he mixes that carr with manganese, and then with a third ingredient, actually a white clay, but a very pure, highly refined white clay that comes in from England's West Country, Cornwall and Dorset. And by mixing those three things together and firing them, this material becomes black. So again, this clay that we're looking at is black through and through. It's not black because of a glaze treatment or some other surface treatment to these objects. Wedgwood and his contemporaries made the objects that we're about to look at a time when the neoclassical style was the predominant style in late 18th century England, and it was what fashionable people wanted to live with. And so to serve that customer base and anticipate what they might want to live with, Wedgwood and others freely borrowed from a wide range of different design sources to make their wares, including sources from classical antiquity. And so we have this wonderful bust of Alexander the Great, the very important figure from ancient Greece, the Macedonian ruler who in his very short lifetime, 33 years old is when he died, he conquered basically all of Eurasia. And so this basalt bust of Alexander, which is, by the way, one of a kind, is the only one that's known to exist, it derives from a Greek marble bust of Alexander that dates to about the 3rd century BCE. So this basalt derives from an ancient artifact, whereas, as we turn the corner, we get to the bust of Mercury, who is, of course, the god of commerce in classical mythology with his winged hat. And he was made by a man named John Flaxman, who was a modeler who worked for Josiah Wedgwood. So this was created in the 18th century, in other words. We'll see that pattern develop more fully as we go on. For instance, follow me into the rest of this gallery. And we get to this wonderful sculpture here of a Titan. This is one of the tallest sculptures that Wedgwood made. It's 25 inches tall, and it is based on a greater than life-size marble sculpture by a man named Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the titan of the art world in 17th century Rome. On the other hand, this small sculpture of Bacchus, the god of wine in ancient mythology, derives from a marble sculpture by none other than Michelangelo, great figure of the Italian Renaissance, 16th century Italy. So again, we just see so many different examples of Wedgwood and his other Staffordshire potters looking through various design sources for inspiration for their material. As I continue through these galleries, you probably have already picked up on the wonderful colors that we are surrounded by, this incredible design. And I want to acknowledge the enormous contribution of the Mint's exhibitions designer, a woman named Hannah Crowell, and a contemporary artist living here in Charlotte named Al. It is their vision that we are seeing today, where each of the three galleries, and again right now we're in the first, but each of the galleries is just this riot of beautiful, warm colors that make these basalt sculptures just pop out. They stand out so well against these colors. You'll notice as we walk around rounded arches or pilasters or a mantelpiece in the third gallery, All of those are designs that Hannah came up with to help suggest a neoclassical interior of the 18th century, even while they're painted in these very contemporary colors. These line designs that you see, and we're turning now to see some white ones on this wall here, and there will be many large black ones. They were the contribution of the woman named Al that I mentioned, O-W-L. She's an incredibly gifted, talented, sensitive, thoughtful artist living here in Charlotte, and she calls these her blobs. To me, that seems to almost do them a disservice because they're so lively, so dynamic, so suggestive of three-dimensional works, even though they actually are only two-dimensional. And again, they serve as this wonderful complement for the actual three-dimensional works that we have to view today. Let's go on a little bit farther. So I was mentioning that Wedgwood borrows from a lot of different sources, including from classical antiquity. Another great example of that are these plaques, or what he would have called medallions, on this wall here. These are three-dimensional, low-relief depictions of what were actually wall paintings that were dug out of the ground, uncovered, if you will, in the middle of the 18th century through the excavations that were taking place at Herculaneum, and in this case in particular, Pompeii. And I bet a lot of you know that name. Pompeii, of course, was one of those towns that was swallowed up when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, completely covered the entire town and all the people perished. Well, in the 18th century, they start to uncover that ancient civilization. They're digging through the ground to uncover the buildings and the roads and so on. And in one of those buildings, the Villa of Cicero, they go into one of the rooms, the archaeologists, and there are these beautiful wall paintings of dancing nymphs and other bacchanalian figures and centaurs and so on. And those two-dimensional wall paintings served as the inspiration for these reliefs that we have right here. Likewise, the sculpture of the infant Hercules strangling the serpent derives from an ancient marble sculpture that was made in about the 2nd century CE in Rome. What I find so amusing about this is the way Hercules is represented. Now, those of you who are classical mythology enthusiasts and know your story of Hercules way before he gets to the challenges of his 12 labors where he has to kill the Nemean lion and the Erymathean boar and all those other labors, his story really begins when he's just a baby in the crib. He turned out to be the offspring of Zeus, the king of all the gods on Mount Olympus, and a mortal woman named Alcmene. And when Hera, the queen of all the gods and Zeus's wife, found out about that affair, in a jealous rage, she sent these 2 giant serpents to kill Hercules, the baby, in his crib. Well, before anyone could rush in to save the child, Hercules, the baby, just sits up in his crib as calmly as can be and strangles those 2 serpents. So that's the story. But what I think is so amusing is the way it's depicted here. In other artistic representations of this story, you're really aware of that life and death moment. The artist will typically have at least one of those snakes' heads with those sharp poisonous fangs right by the child's face. So you feel that tension there. What do we have here? Instead, over the child's right arm, we have the end of the snake, the tail of the snake, if you will, draped over his right bicep. And you have to walk all the way around the sculpture to see the snake's head. And does that snake look fierce to you? I think it looks like it's kind of smiling. So what's happening here? So it turns out that the sculpture that this derived from, this basalt sculpture derived from, was indeed of a young boy sitting, but it differs from what we see here in 2 crucial ways. One was, in the marble sculpture, the child's right arm is extended full out like this, fingers splayed, as if he's saying, "Mom, I'm tired of sitting down. Could you give me a lift up? I want to stand now." The second thing is, there's no snake in that Roman marble sculpture. Instead, the child is resting his left hand on his pet goose. So some clever person in the 18th century probably recognized how by making just a few key changes they could transform that Roman marble sculpture of a young boy and his pet goose into the infant Hercules purportedly strangling the serpent. So it may sound like I'm kind of mocking this subject, but what I really want to point out more than anything is that this, which by the way is also one of a kind, just like Alexander was and some of the other sculptures in this first gallery, all of these large sculptures were made in the first 5 to 7 years of Wedgwood's manufacture of his basalt material. That's amazing. These are technological marvels. You know, we live in a state here in North Carolina that's just riddled with gifted potters, and so we just assume that everything comes out of the kiln perfectly the first time. The works look exactly the way the artist intended. But this was the beginning of this industry. Wedgwood was still messing around with what the kiln temperature had to be and how long things had to be in the kiln. And he had no gifted modelers working for him at this point. Everything was an experiment. And the fact that something like this, essentially a life-size sculpture of a human baby boy, came out and is in great condition, that's amazing.